and welcome to the Daily Obsession. Today I'm going to be speaking about a bit of a theory I have, and that theory is where the movie industry is going to go next. Now, what does that mean? So, in the movie industry and throughout history of cinema, there have been general ideas and genres that have taken over the industry for years in a row. Stuff like when Alfred Hitchcock came out with his movies, it was such a huge deal that there were so many copies, and that genre of suspenseful thriller type movies took over the industry for years. In the early 80s and 70s and 90s, there was the slasher films, the horror films, stuff like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream, that took over drive-in movie theaters everywhere because that's what people wanted to see, was these big, scary villains attacking, teenage life. It was a very 80s thing. And then nowadays, from the 2000s to the 2010s, the big genre is quite obviously superhero movies. Once Marvel released Iron Man in 2008, we realized what a superhero movie could be. It could be intriguing characters that, across multiple movies, could create this universe of shared loved characters. And amazing actors soon jumped on the train. Despite them not being the biggest actors, they took over the movie world. Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, none of them were huge name stars. And then they joined Marvel, and their movies became so popular that they immediately became the big name stars. Then slowly, people that were the big names before these movies came out slowly started joining in on these movies. You had people like Hugo Weaving, who was a huge name from the Lord of the Rings series, joining Captain America. You had Jeff Bridges joining Iron Man. It was an incredible time because it was a bit of a fusion between the newer generation of actors in Hollywood and the older generation, creating this hugely popular series. Now, where could Hollywood go from here? It doesn't look like superhero movies are going to die out anytime soon, but people keep talking about how stale some of these movies are getting, how it really just starts to look like a cash grab using big effects. And with Endgame coming out recently, Marvel Universe has hit almost a stagnation period where it's been 11 months or so since the last Marvel movie, and we're not getting another one till November. It's going to be a long time where people are realizing that other movies need to take their place. And what movies swept in this time? You had the video game adaptations. Since the 1980s, there have been several video game adaptation movies. We had Street Fighter, we had Mortal Kombat, we had the Mario Brothers movie. They were terrible, but they were attempts at turning a video game into a movie. Now, video games are very difficult to turn into movies. This lies in the fact that when you're adapting a book to a movie, you gain something. You gain the visual element. When you're reading a book, you just have words and dialogue, and you have a story. And that's not a dig against books. Books are excellent. But when you add in the visuals to the mix, you get the same story, you get the same words that are being spoken, but you also get to see all the action played out by actors, and you get to see all these cool effects. Like, reading The Lord of the Rings is my favorite book series of all time. Everything about those books are amazing. But seeing Gandalf fighting the Balrog is incredible. Seeing Frodo sitting in Bag End is incredible. Seeing all these beautiful scenes that were vividly told to me in a book brought to life on the big screen is an incredible experience. But when you're turning a video game into a movie, you don't gain something, you lose something. Because when you're playing a video game, you already have the visuals. You already have the story, you already have the words, but you also have control. When you're playing a video game, you get to move the character. You get to live with that character in their world. You get to fight his battles, their battles. You get to live and breathe the world that they live in. It's an incredible experience, and as video games get more and more complex and incredible, the stories grow to be more and more complex and incredible. You have games like The Last of Us 2 and The Last of Us 1 that tell incredible stories that push the genre of horror past what movies can do. You have stories like The Legend of Zelda that take these huge fantasy adventures and push it so that you experience the entire world and not just the small snippets that a 2-hour movie can find. It's incredible that the ways that the video game industry is pushing storytelling in general to greater heights. And that's where you lose stuff from going from a video game to a movie, because you lose that sense of control over the world. And this is why video games are just starting to be adapted into movies well. All these video games have realized how difficult it is to compete with these big names, and they create video games that are almost cash grabs. They create games that are very straightforward, very linear, and very, very action-packed. This is basically the way you make a movie. It's a very linear story. You don't have much options. It's just effects, it's just action, and it's just linear. And that's the problem, is that when you create this, all these famous video games, all the ones that video game people, gamers in general, love, they don't get to see their favorites adapted to the big screen as often, because it's harder to take something with excellent gameplay and excellent story that's wide and expansive and turn it into a movie, because you lose something. But turning something like Detective Pikachu or Sonic the Hedgehog into a movie is easier because it's a linear, simple story with action. Now, this is why these movies succeed, but why do I think that video game movies are going to keep taking over the industry? Well, people are just starting to learn how to write a video game movie, because all these popular ones, such as Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog, they were simple stories that are being adapted into the real world. Well, as real a world as you can create with Pokemon or blue hedgehogs that run at the speed of sound. But why was Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog successful? It really lies in the fact that they're recognizable. You can't really think that something like Gears of War is going to be as popular as a Pokemon movie. And that's part of the dangers of trying to create so many series that are just guns and explosions, is that you don't have that recognizability. With Detective Pikachu, you were taking arguably one of the most recognizable things on the planet, which is Pokemon, and turning it into this live-action comedy experience with beautiful effects, with so many Pokemon, and all these children and all these people who grew up on Pokemon, they get to see it on the big screen, which is incredible. So, and Sonic the Hedgehog, what worked with that was that they made it a pure comedy, just taking the characters from Sonic the Hedgehog. They didn't try to make a movie about about Sonic the Hedgehog chasing Dr. Eggman down in a giant robot to save animals on his little island. That wouldn't have made much sense. So they just brought it into our world. And that's where everything is starting to work out for video game movies, is that they're learning that the way to make a video game movie is to take the barest basics of the story and adapt it in a way that hasn't been done before. A straight adaptation of a game is never going to work unless that game is super linear and super structured. Because if you take something like Call of Duty, it's a fun game because it's multiplayer and it's guns, but there's really no recognizability for it beyond the fact that it's guns. And it's got a name that's very popular because a lot of people buy the games. There's no character that's a mascot for the series. There's no basic elements of the game that is very unique to Call of Duty. So despite the fact there's a Call of Duty movie coming out, I don't think it's going to succeed because there's not going to be anything you can see from that movie that immediately makes you think, oh, that's Call of Duty, beyond the fact that there's guns in it, which there's guns in every second Hollywood movie. So there's nothing special about that. This is why I think that two companies really are at the forefront of being able to lead the video game movie revolution, as it were. I think that PlayStation and Nintendo really have the greatest bet at having successful movie enterprises. Why do I say this? Well, Nintendo, let's start with them. They have Mario, they have Link, they have Pikachu, they have Kirby. All these characters that, since the 1980s, have been killing it on consoles and have basically grown up and matured as characters along with their players. Well, maybe not Kirby, but still. You have these games that people have grown up with their entire lives, so now you have an audience that ranges from 20 to 30-year-olds to 6-year-olds, meaning you have a huge audience already. Now, try to make a movie out of that. You've got every single game in the Mario franchise is built around one basic concept. Mario wears a red hat and blue overalls, and he can jump. Every single game, whether it takes place in space, whether it takes place as a golfing game, whether it takes place on a floating ship that's flying through the clouds, it doesn't matter. They all are based around the concept Mario is really good at jumping. Mario needs to beat Bowser and save Princess Peach. Can you make a movie out of that? Hell yeah, you can make a movie out of that, because you made something so simple that an animated movie about a guy in a red hat and blue overalls who everyone recognizes, and he can jump and he can fight a giant turtle with spikes that has captured his princess. That is the most basic plot to a movie you can imagine, but it'll work because it's just about the fun you can have with it. Think about Pikachu. They already successfully made a movie based on it by taking something that was not as popular of a game, Detective Pikachu, but it had a story, and they adapted that. And because they had Ryan Reynolds, who is arguably a very famous actor in Hollywood with a fantastic voice, they had him voice a comedic and funny version of Pikachu. You have the recognizability of the character for children, you have the recognizability of the actor for the parents who have to take the children, and you have a very good all-around movie for everyone else. It's a genius play. With Sonic the Hedgehog, you had a very recognizable character in a movie starring Jim Carrey, so all the parents who had to take their children to see this got some old nostalgia from those 1980s times of the classic films like Ace Ventura and The Truman Show. So that's what I think is the golden formula for creating a movie, is to have a recognizable character for all the people who played the games and who are going to see those movies, and for the people who don't necessarily play games. And why should they go? You hire a big name actor to play a character. You hire somebody who's incredible with directing or with making music, or you make it really funny so that the people who may not know much about the series still want to go see this movie. Another way you could do this, which is how I think PlayStation could win this, is by making good genre movies off of it. PlayStation has some excellent games for storytelling. They have Uncharted, they have The Last of Us, they even have their own sort of icons in Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, despite the fact he's been on multiple platforms. He used to be a PlayStation guy. And these are all characters that you can make excellent genre movies out of. Uncharted is basically Indiana Jones. You could make an excellent action movie out of that, and in fact, they are trying to. And then you have games that they are owners of, like Last of Us, that are getting TV shows because they are so excellent storytelling-wise, and they're so linear that you can make an excellent genre piece off of it. You can make a zombie movie that pushes boundaries by making a Last of Us movie. You can make an excellent action movie that pushes the way that stunts are done by making an Uncharted movie. And I know several people are against this because they think that by making a movie out of it, they'll ruin the game or they'll ruin the story or the characters. But I think it's really inevitable that video game movies are going to be made. At the moment, there's almost more video game movies in production than there are superhero movies in production. For superhero movies, we've gotten confirmation of 5 or 6 Marvel movies and 3 or 4 DC movies. But with video game movies, we've got Monster Hunter, we've got Without Remorse, which is a Rainbow Six Siege thing that's being adapted with Michael B. Jordan. You've got a new Mortal Kombat that's being made with James Wan. You've got Uncharted starring Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland. You've got a new Tomb Raider coming out. You've got a Minecraft movie coming out. There's a new Borderlands movie coming out. You've got The Division. You've got Fatal Frame, Firewatch, Five Nights at Freddy's. There's even supposed to be a Fruit Ninja movie coming out somehow. But what do these have in common? They're what I've been saying. The Mortal Kombat movie has famous director James Wan, who's known for his excellent horror pieces, directing the movie. For Without Remorse, which is based off of Rainbow Six Siege, despite the fact that's just a gun sort of game, that's just shooting and looting, you've got Michael B. Jordan, who has exploded in popularity and fame these past couple years. With Monster Hunter, you've got Mila Jovovich and Ron Perlman starring in it, which that's putting big names on a series that may not be well known with big effects. Uncharted is probably going to succeed because it's a cool action movie starring one of the biggest names in Hollywood, Tom Holland, and Mark Wahlberg, who's he's growing old, but he's still got star power. Minecraft is just Minecraft, so that'll probably be successful. But Borderlands, it's a not as well-known series as some of the other ones. It's still very popular among the gaming community, but you've only got a director that's not done as many things, but is still excellent. But how are they going to get people to go? They got Cate Blanchett, who's super famous for playing Hela in Thor Ragnarok and Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings franchise. They got her to play the main character in the series. So what I'm saying is that video game movies have developed their own formula for becoming well-made or being considered well-made, is by taking the basics of the series and sticking big names on them, 1 or 2, and then for the rest of it, just hiring people that are enthusiastic about the games that they're developing into the movies so that they put the same passion in that the developers of the games themselves are putting in. This is why I think that video games are going to be the next big thing, because there's so many being in development and so many are just starting to succeed that people are learning how to make a good movie. Thank you for listening. This has been the Daily Obsession. And if you have any comments, leave them below, and I'll see you next time.